Republicans reject any link between GOP rhetoric and Paul Pelosi assault.
A chilling hour of testimony where David DePape took the stand, showing little remorse for the attack on Paul Pelosi.
Why is the Republican Party, why is the conservative movement to blame for gay schizophrenic nudists that are hemp jewelry makers breaking into somebody's home, or maybe not breaking into somebody's home? Why are we to blame for that exactly?
He told the jury he would spend his off time sitting in the garage where he lived, playing video games, watching YouTube, and listening to right-wing podcasts.
Why are we to blame for that exactly? Why are we to blame for that exactly? And why is he still in jail? Why has he not been bailed out? By the way, if some amazing patriot out there in San Francisco or the Bay Area wants to really be a midterm hero, someone should go and bail this guy out. I bet his bail's like 30 or 40,000 bucks. Bail him out and then go ask him some questions.
Okay, you've heard about it by now, and I've heard about it by now. About what happened to Charlie Kirk out of nowhere on a Wednesday afternoon. Many of you didn't just hear it, you saw it in footage that you probably wish you didn't see before social media platforms managed to get a handle on it. But you already know all of that, and I'm not just here to give a news report. I'm here to talk about what this event shows about the media environment that we live in, where the left and right play by different rules, where violence against people on the right is immortalized by the right wing and the complicit media, while violence perpetrated by people on the right, which is much more common, is downplayed, buried in the subject of jokes. But with this case in particular, there's something unusual in how the right is responding to this. Kirk isn't just being mourned, he's being treated like he was a saint. Republicans wanted to hold a spoken prayer for him in Congress, which wasn't even offered for the school shooting that happened earlier that same day. Kirk was the subject of a White House address from the big man himself, or an AI version of him, and the White House flags were taken down to half-staff for him, which is something usually done for former presidents or national disasters. This tells us a lot about our media ecosystem and how well the right understands and plays this game. Because make no mistake, Charlie Kirk was not a saint. And not merely because he was a conservative. This is a guy who actively took joy in violence being done to others. This is a guy who was in the middle of normalizing being against MLK and the Civil Rights Act when he died. And yet the mainstream media is treating him like he was just a normal person, labeling him as a mere political activist and giving him glowing profiles with plenty of quotes from his friends and loved ones. This is treatment that the mainstream media typically does not give to people who do these things, who fight for those beliefs. But because he was internet famous enough, because the right wing has made it so, Charlie Kirk was mainstream. And if they have their way, his beliefs will be too. That's why I'm making this video, because I want those of us on the progressive left to begin to see how all of this works. The right-wing domination of our media and discourse is a big reason why we're in the moment we are now. And by understanding how we got here, we can start thinking about how we're going to get out of it. Let's start by talking about how the right responds to violence depending on who the victims are. You see, what makes the hypocrisy here so easy to prove is that we happen to have a case study on how the right would respond if someone on the left were to be killed by a right-winger for political purposes. And it happens to be the subject of my last video. It happened just a few months ago, in Minnesota, where an assassin who had a history of giving right-wing anti-LGBT and anti-abortion sermons impersonated a cop and shot and killed Melissa Hortman, a Democratic lawmaker and her husband. The same person then shot another Democratic lawmaker and his spouse, but they survived. When the police found and arrested the shooter, he had a hit list in his car with the names of other Democratic politicians and abortion providers in his car. This is an obviously politically motivated attack which had a direct effect on the government. 2 people were killed here, and 2 more would have died as well if their own daughter didn't survive the shooting to call 911. Now look, Charlie Kirk was a human being too. I'm not saying that his life didn't matter, but he was still one person, and 1 is less than 2. And he wasn't a lawmaker with a role in government. By all accounts, the shooting should have been at least twice as urgent to the White House. So what kind of response did this get? Well, as I covered in my last video, the right wing from top to bottom got together to spin the narrative that the shooter was anything other than a right-wing Trump voter. Everyone from right-wing influencers to Elon Musk and Donald Trump Jr. got out there to say that it was a leftist that shot these lawmakers. Mike Lee, who was not an influencer but a Republican elected to the Senate, went one further and not just saying that the shooter was a leftist, but also made an edgy joke about connecting it to Tim Walz. Melissa Hortman and her husband didn't get a White House address when they lost their lives. They didn't get flags flown at half-staff in their honor. Trump didn't even bother calling Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota, about it when it happened, saying that it was a waste of time. Speaking of Trump, let's compare his statements on these 2 shootings. For Melissa Hortman and her husband, Trump put out an online statement. He calls it a terrible shooting and does say that the violence would not be tolerated, but notice what he doesn't say. He doesn't name the victims of the shooting, and he certainly doesn't mention the ideology of the shooter. But when it happened to Charlie Kirk, we got a video press release where it's all about Charlie. And would you look at that? Trump knows exactly who to blame for this, and he said so. It's the radical left. Full stop. It's their fault. Before we get into analysis, let's look at another example, one that Charlie himself had something to say about. In 2022, a man invaded Nancy Pelosi's home, intending to attack her. Instead, he found her husband and attacked him with a hammer, putting him in the hospital. The attacker publicly espoused many right-wing beliefs, including QAnon and the idea that the 2020 election was stolen from Trump. And of course, the right-wing not only lied about his motivations, they joked about it, saying that the attacker was actually in a homosexual affair with Paul Pelosi. The attack was taken so lightly among the right that Charlie Kirk himself publicly called for someone in his audience to bail out the attacker from jail, as I showed you in my intro. And these are just two examples. I can go on and on about instances of not just right-wing violence, but right-wing mass violence. Pittsburgh in 2018, El Paso in 2019, Buffalo in 2022. All of them mass shootings, all of them with right-wing motives, none of them getting this kind of attention from the right. And the point I'm trying to make is that this isn't an accident. It is a strategy they have used to manipulate public opinion and the media, and it's worked for them for the most part. Republicans have been both focused and unified in downplaying or muddying the waters around violence caused by someone that shares their ideology, and very successful at putting the spotlight on violence that happens to them, and forcing the left to have decorum and respect, while the right gets to be as edgy and irreverent as they want all the time. In the aftermath of this shooting, an MSNBC anchor was fired for suggesting that Kirk's hateful words led to hateful actions. DC Comics canceled an entire series of comics after one of their writers made light of the shooting. And Florida's state government has promised to fire teachers that attack Kirk online after this event. Meanwhile, none of the people in high positions who joked about Melissa Hortman and her husband's death faced any formal consequences. No one who joked about Paul Pelosi's attack faced formal consequences. And none of them faced any consequences about the lies they told or even lost any credibility with their audiences. This is the fundamental asymmetry that is always used against the left and that the right benefits from. The right and the media have created an environment where it is always up to the left to be respectful because it is the left that believes in accountability. Whereas on the right, the cruelty and lies are actively celebrated. It is the right that gets to joke and lie. It is the right that gets to play with language. Meanwhile, the fact is that the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, and the NIJ, just to name a few, have consistently found that right-wing extremism is statistically the biggest lethal domestic terror threat in the United States, which is why one of the first things that Trump did as president was to eliminate the funding for organizations that study domestic terrorism and has made the FBI stop focusing on right-wing extremism. And this matters, because you better believe that the right and the Trump administration is going to use this to justify more authoritarian crackdowns and more use of the military against civilians, particularly blue states, and the pattern that I just talked about will be used in how they convince the general public and the right that it is justified. They will use the perception of increased violence against the right and the current administration to crack down on whoever they can. Like I've said, the right is very good at controlling narratives, and this is because they understand a rule of the mass media age better than the left does. Appearance is reality. It doesn't matter that we can prove that the majority of political violence comes from the right. As long as all people see is the story of Charlie Kirk being shot, it doesn't matter that we have a million stories of right-wing violence against the left, against the public, because the right has successfully muddied the waters with confusion until the next story took its place. The right believes that for a lot of the general public, they will believe that the right is a victim of violence more than the other way around if that is all they see day after day. And they're going to be right. When the left is forced to respect the humanity of those who were hurt, to dignify as a real thing that happened, while the right gets to downplay and laugh off violence from their side, we get a media environment where only one type of violence is real. Violence against the right. And that is exactly what this administration wants, and it is exactly what they're getting. I hope I am wrong about this, but I'm expecting a crackdown to come. Washington, D.C. was already placed under martial law because a Doge staffer was allegedly mugged. How do you think they're going to use this? So we on the left, whether you call yourself a liberal or a progressive, or just anti-authoritarian, we have a job to do. Maybe it won't be enough today, but it will be better than doing nothing, and it will help set us up for the future. We need to take the narrative back, or at least disrupt theirs as much as possible. Here's how I suggest we do that. Let's start with what not to do. There are two rhetorical traps that the right wants us to fall into, and a lot of people are. The first one is the defensive approach, the mainstream media approach where we try to prove to the right how empathetic and respectful we are, or we make kind statements about how shocked and saddened we are at this tragedy, where our political differences are a topic for another time. This is exactly the kind of response that the right wants in a moment like this. All it does is help the right do exactly what they're trying to do in this moment, which is canonize the death of one right-wing influencer into a national tragedy that everyone will remember and keep fresh in their minds. At the same time, we shouldn't fall into the other trap, which is the offensive approach, in both senses of the word. It's where we go on the attack unloading all the reasons why Kirk was actually a bad person, where we get all internet edgy and make glib jokes about Charlie's death, and essentially publicly celebrate this. Look, I'm not a moralist when it comes to tone policing, but it should be pretty clear why this isn't very helpful strategically. You must remember that when you engage in political debate, or making your voice heard, especially in online platforms, the purpose should not only be talking to others on the left, but trying to reach the general public who might see what you have to say. So that leaves the question, what do we do? The answer? We do both at the same time. For example, you can say, this violence is tragic and horrifying. And as someone on the left who values human life, I condemn this violence wholeheartedly. Unlike Charlie Kirk, who called on his audience to bail out Paul Pelosi's attacker. And I certainly do not think that his death was worth it for any larger political goal. Unlike Charlie Kirk, who said that school shootings are worth preventing gun regulations. That is what we need to do. The first part, condemning the violence, is obligatory, but also does something very important, which is that it disrupts the moralizing, aggrieved posture that the reactionary is going to try and put on you. Then, when you immediately move on and bring up Charlie's own words in contrast, you put the reactionary on defense, and you make Charlie's advocacy and positions the topic of conversation, not the fact that he met a gruesome end. This is important because the right is essentially trying to canonize Kirk into being a saint right now, and that means trying to convince the general public who don't know that much about him into thinking that he was a brave person who lived his life advocating for what he believed in, engaging in the great Enlightenment project of spreading his ideals by peacefully advocating them in open discussion when he was brutally killed. You know, just like Gandhi or MLK. The needle that we on the left need to thread is that we need to educate the public on who Charlie is and what he was trying to achieve with his influence, while also not seeming insensitive or cruel. To do this, we need to display the appropriate level of shock that something like this happened, but we absolutely cannot let Kirk get away with what he tried to argue for in life, because there is a lot more there that most people in the general public would not approve of. And perhaps the main thing that I would want the public to understand about Kirk was his mission, up until the day he died, to tarnish the reputation of Martin Luther King Jr. and roll back the Civil Rights Act of 1964. It's really ironic that reactionaries have been comparing Charlie to MLK lately, because Charlie really did not like MLK. As if trying to prove the left right about the DEI hysteria on the right, Kirk directly linked DEI to the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and has consistently called the Civil Rights Act a mistake that is to blame for anti-white racism.
He says, "Hi, I'm a reporter with Wired magazine in New York. I'm reaching out because we're publishing a story about Charlie Kirk's comments on Martin Luther King Jr. We note in our piece that Kirk describes King as, quote, a bad guy. It's true. And Kirk's self-described very radical view that the country made a mistake when it passed the Civil Rights Act. Also true. Why does Kirk believe passing the Civil Rights Act was a mistake?" Now, again, apparently they don't listen to the show because we do that at least once a week, right? Once a week we talk about why the Civil Rights Act was a mistake. Yeah, and the Civil Rights Act, though, let's be clear, created a beast, and that beast has now turned into an anti-white weapon.
You see, Charlie, along with many other people on the right, are on an ongoing campaign to roll back various civil rights for people they don't like. And the buzzwords of critical race theory and then DEI were very useful code words to help them do this without setting off alarm bells about directly attacking civil rights. This is because MLK has been canonized as an American civil rights hero at this point, and directly going up against him would have been very costly. This is why conservatives of the past tried rhetoric that pretended that they were actually more aligned with MLK than the left was, because by their logic, policies to specifically help minorities was what MLK was fighting against. However, this wasn't going to work out for them in the long run because you only have to go a few steps beyond that to start seeing how MLK was against wealth inequality and marched to support workers' rights. Rehabilitating MLK's image into being a conservative was too big a project for them to take on, so reactionaries like Kirk took on the mission of slowly eroding MLK's reputation and normalizing being against the Civil Rights Act that MLK helped pass, by pointing out exactly how left he was on many things and by leveraging current DEI hysteria to bring mainstream conservatives over. That is what Charlie Kirk stood for. That is what he spent his life doing, and that is what all these glowing, respectful profiles from the mainstream media are leaving out. That is what they are not telling you. Oh, and he also bragged about sending 80 busloads of people to Washington, D.C. on January 6th to help steal the election for Trump, so there's that. So that's the game plan. I want everyone watching this, to the extent that you participate in online discussions, to make information like this known far and wide. I know it seems silly to take something like arguing online this seriously, and a few years ago I wouldn't have thought that it would make a difference at all, but the last few years, from COVID up until the last election up to now, have convinced me that that's not true. The algorithm is now a primary battleground for the future of real-life policy, and the reason why the right has been gaining so much power and influence is precisely because the right has understood this for longer than the left has. This is a bigger topic I want to cover more in a different video, but for now let me close by tying it back to the main subject. One of the clearest signs that the algorithm is a primary battleground for policy is in how Charlie Kirk is being talked about right now on the right. Like I showed at the beginning, the right is treating Kirk with a level of reverence and tribute that isn't even offered to fallen soldiers. He's being given honor that isn't even given to children who lost their lives in school shootings, and not even to actual lawmakers, plural, who are also shot and killed. Let's get something very clear. Kirk was essentially an influencer, a podcaster. He was a content creator, and that doesn't make his life worth less than anyone else's, but his passing is being given gestures that historically are given to former presidents, being treated as a national tragedy, and this is strange if you believe in the idea that all human life is equal. But I submit to you that the right is treating Kirk like he was a groundbreaking lawmaker, because to them, he might as well be. The right has grasped a truth about the age of mass media faster and more effectively than the left has, that appearances are more important than reality. To the average Republican voter, and honestly to the average voter, if they don't see it in a headline or in an algorithm, then it didn't happen. Republicans understand very well that it is their dominance of the media and the algorithm that has led to their current success. Think about the most famous Republican politicians who are the most beloved. Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, Ted Cruz, Donald Trump himself. Are any of them famous among Republicans for landmark pieces of legislation that they either passed or even proposed? Or are they famous for getting headlines, for being visible, for owning the libs and make sure it gets uploaded? I've known about Charlie Kirk since before COVID, and I have to say that he became something I did not expect from him, which was successfully inheriting the SJW-owned college campus debate torch from Ben Shapiro and Steven Crowder. Charlie knew what he was doing with these debates, and he picked his talking points and his targets very well. The usual conservatives ate this up, and this pushed him into algorithmic success to the point that I know people who are completely non-political, who don't know what the differences between left and right politics are, who know about Charlie Kirk and think that he's very knowledgeable because they've seen him on TikTok. Charlie is perhaps the most blatantly right-wing person to get such mainstream traction. He held beliefs that edged right on the border of being a white nationalist, yet knew how to hide them well enough when he was in the spotlight. He got views, lots and lots of them, and he used the spectacle of debate as a means of getting normies on board with his politics. He was a man that lived and breathed the algorithm, and perhaps it's darkly poetic that even in his death he would go viral too. Charlie Kirk was not a lawmaker, but he might as well have been, because his job and a Republican politician's job were the same. Their security clearances might have been different, but their jobs and their strategies for winning power were the same. For the right, headlines are legislation. Owning the libs is legislation. And Charlie did both those things for them. So I hope this video helped those of you to understand what's going on in these times. As I've said in past videos, I think it's extremely important in our moment for left content creators and our audiences to be very organized and unified. And I think that we all have an important role to play right now. But I have one more really important point to make about all of this, and it's something I need all of you to understand and remember. It's really crucial that you understand what I am about to say. And if you remember one and only one thing from this video, let it be this. release the Epstein files. Thank you for watching my video. If you liked it, please remember to like and subscribe. If you really like what I do and would like to help me start doing this full time, feel free to check out my Patreon. This was more of a quick response video I made due to the sudden news event. I think I may have one more quick video I want to get out there about this, and I also have another longer video that's nearly complete once I'm through with that. I hope you'll stick around to see what else I have to say. So thanks again, and I'll see you next time.